Have you ever wondered why the UK doesn't have a single written constitution like the United States? It's a fascinating story, deeply rooted in a pivotal moment in English history, the Glorious Revolution. Today, we're going to dive deep into this so-called bloodless revolution, understand the crucial documents it produced, and see how its legacy has been shaped over the centuries. So, let's set the stage. The year is 1685. King Charles II dies, and his brother, James II, ascends the throne. Now, this was a problem for many in England. Why? Because James was openly Catholic in a fiercely Protestant nation. Tensions had been simmering for decades between Parliament and the monarchy over power and religion. James II's father, Charles I, had been executed after a civil war, and the memory of that conflict was still fresh. James II quickly began to antagonize the political establishment. He appointed Catholics to high offices in the army, government, and universities, using his royal prerogative to suspend laws that barred them from these positions. This was seen as a direct assault on the authority of Parliament and the Protestant faith. He also maintained a large standing army just outside London, which made many people nervous. Was he planning to impose his will by force, just as continental monarchs were doing? The breaking point came in 1688. Two events happened in quick succession. First, James issued the Declaration of Indulgence, which granted broad religious freedom. While that might sound good to us today, at the time it was seen as another attempt to favor Catholicism and override parliamentary law. He ordered the Anglican clergy to read it from their pulpits. When 7 bishops refused and petitioned him, he had them arrested and tried for seditious libel. The public was outraged, and their eventual acquittal was met with widespread celebration. The second, and perhaps more critical, event was the birth of James's son, James Francis Edward Stuart. Until then, James's heir was his Protestant daughter, Mary, who was married to the Dutch leader, William of Orange. Many had been willing to tolerate James's rule, assuming Mary would eventually succeed him and restore the Protestant order. But the birth of a male heir, who would be raised Catholic, created the prospect of a permanent Catholic dynasty on the English throne. This was a nightmare scenario for the Protestant elite. Faced with this crisis, a group of 7 prominent nobles and bishops, known as the Immortal Seven, took a radical step. They wrote a secret letter to William of Orange, inviting him to invade England with an army to restore English liberties and the Protestant religion. William, who was already concerned about the growing power of his rival, King Louis XIV of France, saw this as a golden opportunity. James II was an ally of France, so securing England would strengthen William's position in Europe. In November 1688, William landed at Torbay with a large Dutch army. As he marched towards London, support for James II crumbled. Key figures in the army and aristocracy defected to William's side, including John Churchill, the future Duke of Marlborough, and even James's own daughter, Anne. James lost his nerve. He attempted to flee to France, was captured, but was then essentially allowed a second team. William and his supporters cleverly wanted him gone. Putting another king on trial would have been messy and divisive. By fleeing, James was seen to have abdicated the throne. This is why it's called the Glorious Revolution. It was largely bloodless. at least in England, and it resulted in a fundamental shift of power without a major civil war. But with James gone, England had a problem. Who was the rightful ruler? This led to the creation of the Convention Parliament in January 1689. This wasn't a regular parliament because it wasn't summoned by a king. It was an assembly that convened to solve the constitutional crisis. They debated furiously. Was James still king? Had he abdicated? Was the throne vacant? After much discussion, they declared that James II, by breaking his contract with the people and fleeing, had abdicated the government and that the throne was thereby vacant. But before they offered the crown to William and Mary, they wanted to ensure that no future monarch could abuse their power as James had. So, they drafted one of the most important documents in English history, the Bill of Rights of 1689. This was unto Bill of Rights in the modern sense of granting rights to citizens. Instead, it was a list of wrongs committed by James II and a declaration of the limits on royal power. Let's look at some of its key provisions. It stated that the monarch could not suspend or dispense with laws without Parliament's consent. This was a direct response to James's declaration of indulgence. It declared that levying taxes without a grant from Parliament was illegal. It also asserted that maintaining a standing army in peacetime without Parliament's consent was against the law. These clauses fundamentally shifted the balance of power from the Crown to Parliament. Especially regarding finance and military control, the Bill of Rights also guaranteed certain liberties. It affirmed the right of subjects to petition the king without fear of prosecution, a direct nod to the case of the 7 bishops. It called for free elections for members of Parliament and protected freedom of speech within Parliament itself. It also banned excessive bail, excessive fines, and cruel and unusual punishments. The Bill of Rights established a constitutional monarchy where the monarch ruled with the consent of Parliament, not by divine right alone. William and Mary accepted these conditions and were crowned joint monarchs in February 1689. The constitutional settlement, however, wasn't quite complete. The Bill of Rights had settled the immediate crisis, but what about the long-term succession? William and Mary were childless, and Mary's sister and children had all died young. To prevent the Catholic Stuarts from ever returning to the throne, Parliament passed another landmark act in 1701, the Act of Settlement. The Act of Settlement was all about securing a Protestant line of succession. It decreed that after William and Anne, the crown would pass to Sophia of Hanover, the granddaughter of James I, and her Protestant descendants. It explicitly barred any Catholic or anyone married to a Catholic from ever inheriting the throne. This rule remains in effect to this day, though the part about marrying a Catholic was recently amended. But the Act of Settlement did more. It added further restrictions on the monarch's power. It stipulated that judges would hold their positions on good behavior, not at the king's pleasure, ensuring judicial independence. It also stated that no person who held an office or place of profit under the crown could be a member of Parliament, an attempt to prevent the king from corrupting Parliament with patronage. And, crucially, it required that all matters of governance be discussed with the Privy Council, preventing the monarch from making decisions in secret with a small group of advisers. Together, the Bill of Rights and the Act of Settlement form the bedrock of the English, and later, British, mostly written constitution. They established parliamentary sovereignty, the rule of law, and a Protestant succession. Now, you might think of a constitution as something permanent, set in stone. But the English Constitution has continued to evolve. A fascinating aspect of this evolution involves the concept of nationality. The Act of Settlement of 1701 included a clause that was very generous by the standards of the time. It stated that Sophia of Hanover and the issue of her body, her descendants, would be naturalized as English subjects. This meant that any Protestant descendant of Sophia, wherever they were born, was considered an English subject. For centuries, this was largely an obscure point of law. But in the 20th century, it became more relevant. After World War II, immigration and nationality became major political issues. The British Nationality Act of 1948 was a major piece of legislation that aimed to define who was a citizen of the United Kingdom and colonies. While it created this new status, it didn't explicitly repeal that old clause from the Act of Settlement. So, when we look back, the Glorious Revolution was far more than just a change of king. It was a constitutional earthquake. It set England on a path towards a stable and limited monarchy, where Parliament held the ultimate power. The principles laid down in the Bill of Rights and the Act of Settlement have shaped governance, liberty, and the rule of law, not just in the UK, but in countries all around the world that inherited its legal traditions, including the United States. The framers of the U.S. Constitution drew heavily on ideas from the English Bill of Rights. It's a complex, evolving story of power, religion, and the long struggle for liberty. And it all began with a secret invitation, a Dutch invasion, and a king who fled in the night.